My name is Connie, and I am 76 years old. For 55 years, I have been Walter's wife. We shared a life built on quiet familiarity mornings, with the newspaper and coffee afternoons, tending the rose garden evenings watching old television shows. Our small house in suburban Ohio held the gentle echoes of a life I believed was simple and true. The roses by the front walk were my pride. The family photos on the mantel showing our grown children and grinning grandchildren were my testament. I thought I knew the texture of my life as well as I knew the feel of my own wedding band worn smooth by time. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday morning, as I was watering the new dawn climbers, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't the soft tap of a neighbor. It was firm, authoritative, and it would tear my world apart. Before I share what happened next, I wonder, where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever had a moment where the ground simply fell away from beneath your feet, please hit that like button and subscribe. My story is just beginning. The knocking was insistent. It didn't have the friendly rhythm of a neighbor dropping by to borrow a cup of sugar. It was 3 sharp raps of pause, then 3 more. A declarative sound. I called out, "Walter, can you get that?" He was in his usual spot in the living room, the crossword puzzle half finished on his lap, his reading glasses perched on his nose. When I turned from the sink, wiping my hands on the faded floral print of my apron, I saw his face. All the color had drained from it, leaving a pale, waxy mask. He didn't move from his armchair, the green velveteen one that had molded to his shape over 20 years. "Connie," he said, his voice low and strange, stripped of its usual mild warmth. "Don't answer it." But I was already moving my mind, clicking through mundane possibilities. A parcel delivery for David, a census taker, maybe someone lost. My hand was on the cool brass of the doorknob. "It's probably nothing, honey," I said, more to soothe the odd fear in his voice than anything else. I opened the door. 3 men in dark suits stood on my porch, blocking the cheerful morning sun. The one in front, a man with a sharp gaze and a clean part in his sandy hair, held up a leather wallet, flipping it open with a practiced flick of his wrist. A gold shield gleamed. "Good morning, ma'am. We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with Walter Driscoll." The words seemed to bounce off me, not penetrating. FBI. They were from television, from movies about spies and gangsters. They did not belong on my porch with its hanging basket of pink petunias and the welcome mat that said, "Bless this home." I heard Walter's chair creak loudly behind me, a sound of sudden weight. He had finally stood up. "I'm Walter Driscoll," he said, his voice suddenly old and tired, like stones grinding together. He had come to stand behind me close, but he felt a million miles away. I could smell his familiar scent of Old Spice and the wool of his cardigan, but it was as if it was coming from a stranger. "Mr. Driscoll, we'd like to ask you some questions regarding the Central Bank of Cleveland armored truck robbery in October of 1978, and your alleged affiliation with an individual known as the Ghost." A high-pitched buzzing started in my ears. Cleveland, 1978. We'd lived there. We'd left there. My social mind, trained for decades in pleasantries, kicked in despite the terror. I found my voice a thin, reedy sound I barely recognized. "There's been a mistake. A terrible mistake. My husband is an accountant. He retired from Great Lakes Steel, the corporate office." I said it with the absolute certainty of decades, the defining fact of our financial life, the bedrock of our security. He had a pension from them. We had the plaque. The agent, who would later tell me his name was Daniel Royce, looked at me. His eyes held no malice, only a profound and weary pity that froze the blood in my veins. It was the look you might give someone standing in the path of a tidal wave. "Mrs. Driscoll," he said, his tone measured, almost gentle, which made it worse. "Your husband, Walter Joseph Driscoll, never held a certified public accountant license in the state of Ohio or any other state. Our records indicate he was employed as an armored truck driver for Armored Solutions from 1974 to 1979. He is one of 3 primary suspects in an unresolved theft of approximately $2 million. We have a warrant for his arrest." The world didn't go black. It shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces, each one a memory, a moment, a belief now reflecting a terrifying new light. I looked at Walter, my partner for over half a century. I searched his face for a laugh, a wink, a frantic shake of his head, any sign this was a monstrous, impossible joke. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a point on the scuffed floorboards of our porch, his jaw set in a grim, hard line I had never seen before. That silence, that refusal to look at me, was his confession. It was more damning than any words. The other two agents stepped forward. The formal, chilling ritual of the law unfolded on my doorstep. They read him his rights, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. Walter just nodded, his eyes still downcast. The metallic click of the handcuffs closing around his wrists was the loudest, most final sound I had ever heard. It echoed in the quiet street. As they guided him past me, his shoulder brushed mine. He leaned in, his breath warm and familiar against my ear for what I knew would be the last time as the man I knew. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words rushed and desperate, almost lost under the sound of a passing car. "Call Arthur Finn. His number is in the brown leather address book on the desk, top right drawer." And then he was gone, led down the walk, his head bowed and placed in the back of a nondescript sedan idling at the curb. I stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame for support, watching the car until it turned the corner and disappeared. The smell of damp earth from my watering can mixed with the sweet scent of my roses. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood, a lawnmower starting a few houses down, a distant dog barking the trill of a robin, felt like they were coming from another planet, a cheery broadcast I was no longer tuned to receive. I was utterly alone in the beautiful empty shell of a life that had just been proven to be a meticulously crafted fiction. I closed the door softly, as if not to wake myself from a bad dream, and walked on numb legs to the old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room. My fingers, which had typed his resume, addressed Christmas cards, and held his hand, trembled as I found the small, worn brown leather address book. I flipped through the mundane entries for the plumber, the doctor, the grandchildren's schools, the bridge club ladies, and there on the last page in Walter's neat, cramped handwriting, I knew so well, Arthur Finn-esque, and a number with the Chicago area code, no other notation. I picked up the heavy rotary phone, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my chest. The line rang twice before a calm professional voice answered. "Arthur Finn. My husband Walter Driscoll, he told me to call you." My voice broke on his name. A slight pause, then a sigh that sounded almost like relief. "Mrs. Driscoll, I've been expecting your call. I'll be on the next flight to Columbus. Do not speak to anyone, not reporters, not neighbors, not even family, until I arrive, and we've had a chance to talk. Do you understand?" He hung up before I could respond. I held the dead receiver to my ear, the dial tone buzzing like a trapped, angry insect. "I've been expecting your call." The phrase echoed in the silent house. How long had this man, this stranger in Chicago, been waiting in the wings of my life, knowing this day would come? The thought was more terrifying than the agents at the door. Arthur Finn arrived that evening, just as the long summer twilight was bleeding into darkness. He was a compact man in his 60s, with a head of perfectly groomed silver hair and a suit that cost more than my living room furniture. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and had an air of unflappable competence that felt both reassuring and alien. He refused my offer of coffee and got straight to business, spreading documents on my kitchen table under the glow of the overhead light. He spoke in careful legalese paragraphs outlining potential defense strategies, federal sentencing guidelines, and the benefits of a plea deal versus trial. He referred to Walter as the client, or Mr. Driscoll, never your husband. He talked about asset forfeiture and restitution. It was all a cold buzzing noise. My mind was a haunted house, and every room I wandered into was filled with flickering, half-remembered images from the past, now viewed through this new horrific lens. The sudden, almost frantic move from Cleveland to this very town in the spring of 1979. Walter had come home one day, not excited but with a tense, determined energy. He said he'd been headhunted for a better managerial accounting position with a small but growing firm here, a fresh start with more money and a real future. We packed our lives into boxes in a whirlwind 2 weeks. I remembered being sad to leave my friends, my book club, the familiar streets, but Walter was so insistent, so convincing that this was for our future, for the children's future. He sold it as his big break. I had been proud of him. His flat, immovable refusal to ever fly. When our son David made the college baseball team and their finals were in California, we drove for 3 days straight. We took road trips for every vacation, always saying we enjoyed seeing the real America. When the kids begged to go to Disney World, he'd plan an elaborate, budget-conscious camping trip out to the Black Hills instead. I thought it was a charming, stubborn quirk, a fear of flying he was too proud to admit. I used to tease him about it. The nightmares. Not often, but maybe once or twice a year. He'd wake up bolt upright, sweating through his pajamas, his heart pounding so hard I could feel it through the mattress. I'd reach for him, ask, "What is it, honey? What's wrong?" He'd always shake his head in the dark, pull away slightly. "Just a bad dream. Don't know what about. Goes away when I wake up. Go back to sleep, Con." And I trusting and sleepy would. After Finn left with strict instructions to sit tight and a promise to visit Walter first thing in the morning, a strange electric energy crackled through my numbness. I couldn't just sit in this house with its ghosts. I had to know. The answers weren't in this sunlit living room with its crocheted Afghans and smiling family photos. They were in the past. And the past in our tidy, unassuming house was stored in the one place we never decorated, the unfinished basement. I flicked the switch at the top of the stairs. The single bare bulb that hung from the center beam cast long dancing shadows. The air was cool and smelled of concrete laundry detergent and the faint dusty scent of old cardboard. Walter's old workbench was there, a relic from his claimed office hobby of woodworking, though the tools were dusty and he hadn't built anything since a birdhouse for the grandchildren a decade ago. There was a heavy olive green metal filing cabinet beside it and a locked red metal tool chest. The small central drawer on the wooden workbench was also locked. I had never had a reason to open it before. Now the reason was an all-consuming fire in my chest. I found a small flat pry bar among some loose screws and sandpaper on a shelf. My hands, which had baked 1,000 pies, kneaded bread dough, and comforted feverish brows, felt strong and cold like tools themselves. With a grunt that tore from somewhere deep inside, I jammed the bar into the seam of the drawer and wrenched the sheet. The wood splintered with a sickening crack that echoed in the cavernous space. Inside there were no nails, no sandpaper, no spare drill bits. There was a single photograph curled at the edges. A black and white picture of a young man in a dark uniform standing beside a large boxy truck with reinforced doors. The man was Walter, maybe 25 years younger, his hair thicker and darker, his smile more careless, almost cocky. He had one foot propped on the truck's running board. The patch on his shoulder was unmistakable Armored Solutions. I stared at this phantom, this stranger from a life he never ever shared with me. This was the man who had courted me. Or had this man already been buried, and I was courted by the ghost? Beneath the photo was the yellowed, carefully folded clipping from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. The headline screamed in bold black type, "Armored Truck Heist, Net over $2 million. Guard critically hurt in hail of gunfire." The date was October 12, 1978. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. October, late fall. That year, Walter had told me he was going on a solo camping trip for 2 days up to Lake Erie. He said he needed to clear his head from work stress that the accounting audits were getting to him. He came back exhausted, withdrawn, quieter than usual. He had a fresh, angry scratch on his cheekbone he said was from a fallen branch. He'd been gone the exact days of the robbery. I had believed him. I had worried about him catching a cold. and at the very bottom of the drawer, a plain, thick manila envelope, the kind you'd use for important documents. It was heavy. I opened the clasp. It was filled with cash, not stacks of neat banded bills, but a disorderly heap of $100 bills, 20s, 50s. They weren't crisp new bills. They were worn soft from handling some with scribbles in the corners, some torn and taped. The smell of old paper and ink rose from the envelope. I didn't count it. I didn't need to. The sheer physical weight of it in my hands told me everything. This was the soil. This was the fertilizer that had fed our life, that had made the down payment on this house, that had cushioned us when Walter's firm had lean years, that had put Evelyn through nursing school and David through his engineering degree, that funded our comfortable retirement. It was all poison. Every memory it touched was now contaminated. I sank onto the cold, gritty concrete floor, the envelope spilling its vile contents beside me like a grotesque treasure. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside, locked in a permafrost of shock. I felt a vast hollow emptiness, as if my very self, Connie wife Mother Gardner, had been scooped out and replaced with this awful silent knowledge. The marriage, the children, the shared jokes over burnt toast, the quiet nights reading side by side the feel of his hand in mine at our daughter's wedding. All of it was a beautiful, intricate stage set lovingly constructed, but built on a foundation of lies, funded by stolen money, and a moment of violence that had shattered another family. Who had I been loving all these years? Who had I been sharing my bed with, my secrets with, my life with? The questions screamed in the silence, but they had no answers, only the cold, hard, damning evidence scattered on the dusty floor around me. The following days dissolved into a blur of grim procedure and private consuming agony. The house felt like a museum of a life that never was. I visited Walter at the county detention center, a stark modern building that hummed with locked doors and echoed with the sounds of misery. We sat across from each other in a crowded visitation room, separated by thick, scratched plexiglass, speaking through perforated metal grates that distorted our voices. He looked 10 years older overnight, his skin a pasty gray, his eyes hollow and haunted, darting around the room as if expecting more ghosts to appear. "It's true, Connie," he said, his voice flat and toneless through the speaker. No greeting, no "how are you holding up?" Just the grim truth. All of it. I drove the truck, the route, the timing. I was the inside man. It wasn't supposed to get violent. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. It was just supposed to be a clean grab in and out. But things went wrong. The guard, Phil Grady, he was a good guy. He fought back. My partner, he panicked. He had a gun. It went off. Walter closed his eyes, a long, slow blink of pain. We split the money 3 ways. I took my third. I knew I had to disappear, change everything. Changed my name back to my mother's maiden name, Driscoll. Moved, invented a whole new work history, bought a fake CPA credential from a guy in a bar. I met you a few years later. You were so good, so normal. I wanted to tell you, 1,000 times I swear, on our wedding day when Evelyn was born. But then we had a life. How could I just wanted to give you all a good life, a safe life, a better life than I came from. His words meant perhaps as an explanation, a plea for understanding landed on me like physical blows. They weren't an apology. They were a confession that transformed my entire history into a supporting role in his crime. The dam of my shock finally broke, but not into the tears he might have expected. It broke into a scalding, clean, righteous rage that burned away the last of my numbness. A good life. My voice was low, shaking with an intensity I didn't recognize, a force that had been buried under 55 years of placid compromise. With dirty money, by making me an unwitting accomplice to a robbery, to a man being shot, by stealing from me the most fundamental right, the right to choose who I was marrying. Our children think their father is an honest, quiet, hardworking man. Now they are the children of a fugitive, a criminal. You didn't give us a good life, Walter. You built us a beautiful prison out of your lies. You made us all inmates, and you were the only one who knew we were locked in." He flinched as if I'd slapped him across the face through the glass. His eyes finally meeting mine were wide with a kind of startled fear. He had expected tears, maybe hysterics. He had not expected this cold, articulate fury from the woman he thought he knew so well. There was nothing more to say. I stood up, my knees cracking, and walked away without looking back. The outside world crashed into my isolation soon after. The story leaked probably from the courthouse. A local news van with a satellite dish on top parked at the end of our driveway like a predatory animal. A fresh-faced reporter with too much lipstick knocked on my door. I simply stared through the sidelight until she left. The phone rang incessantly with blocked numbers until I finally unplugged the old landline from the wall. My quiet street was no longer quiet. I saw curtains twitch in Mrs. Albright's house across the way. At the grocery store, conversations between neighbors would stop abruptly as I rounded the corner into the cereal aisle. I saw pity, naked curiosity, and sometimes a sharp, judgmental glare that felt like a shove. The shame was a physical weight, a lead apron I wore everywhere, bending my shoulders, slowing my steps. I became a prisoner in the home I once loved, jumping at shadows, afraid of the doorbell, the phone, even the mail. My children, Evelyn and David, descended upon the house, not as comfort, but in a storm of their own confusion and raw, directionless anger. They had seen the news online, gotten calls from friends. "Mom, how could you not know?" Evelyn demanded the moment she stepped inside, dropping her purse on the floor, her face flushed with anguish. "You shared a bed with him for 55 years. You filed the joint taxes every April. You balanced the checkbook. Didn't you ever suspect anything? Didn't anything seem off?" Her voice was accusatory, laced with a betrayal that was now aimed at both of us. David was more withdrawn, his anger turned inward, simmering. He paced the living room, not looking at the family photos. "My whole childhood was a lie," he said, his voice tight. "Every hard-earned family vacation to the Grand Canyon, every Christmas present that was a little nicer than our friends, every time he said he worked late on the books. Was any of it real, or was it all just set dressing?" Their pain was valid, a mirror of my own, but their questions were knives expertly twisted in my already gaping wound. Their implication was clear, even if unspoken. I was either a gullible fool or willfully blind, and either option made me complicit in the fraud of our family. The person I had nurtured, protected, and loved unconditionally now looked at me with doubt, even blame. In my darkest moments alone in my bed, staring at the stippled ceiling, I knew so well I wondered the same thing. Was I a fool? Had love and trust made me blind, or had I simply chosen subconsciously not to see the cracks in the story? I looked out the window at my rose garden, the thing of beauty and patience I had cultivated with such tender care, and a grotesque, unbidden thought came. Had I been watering them with blood money all along? Was their vibrant color fed by something rotten deep in the roots? My salvation, when it finally came, didn't look like salvation. It didn't arrive on a white horse. It arrived in a 10-year-old Honda Civic, carrying Martha Peterson, my friend since the 9th grade. She marched up my walk one afternoon, ignoring the now-departed news van's lingering oil stain on the street, carrying a Pyrex casserole dish tuna noodle, my comfort food, and a bottle of Pinot Grigio. She didn't hug me and say, "There, there." She didn't tiptoe around the elephant in the room. She bustled into the kitchen, put the dish in the fridge, found 2 clean glasses, and poured. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same one where we'd gossiped as teenagers, and fixed me with her no-nonsense gaze. "Stop it, Connie," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I can see you crumbling from the inside out. You are a victim of that man, a monumental, historic victim, but you have a choice now, right this minute. You can stay the victim, let this scandal and this lie define the rest of your days, let it shrink you down to nothing. Or you can get up, dust off your backside, and start taking your own life back. And you start by being angry at the right person, him, not yourself. Your job right now is not to fall apart. It's to put yourself back together. Her words were a bucket of ice water thrown in my face. They stung, then shocked me awake. She was right. The self-pity, the shame, the hiding, they were just another prison one I was building for myself. Walter had built the first. I was providing the renovation. Special Agent Daniel Royce came back a few days later. His demeanor had shifted from official pity to a respectful, almost collegial directness. He accepted a glass of iced tea this time. Mrs. Driscoll, we've been able to trace some of the financial trails thanks to Mr. Driscoll's initial statement. It appears the majority of the stolen funds were never recovered in bulk. Our forensic accountants believe he accessed it gradually in small untraceable amounts over the years to supplement your legitimate income, cover large purchases, and build your savings. It was a slow bleed from a hidden reservoir. He paused, sipping his tea. There's also another matter I feel you should be aware of, though it's painful. The security guard, Philip Grady. He survived the shooting but with permanent brain damage from a bullet that grazed his skull. He lost his job, of course. His marriage fell apart under the strain of his care. He's lived on disability and charity ever since in a managed care facility outside Akron. His sister is his guardian. His life and his family's life was effectively ruined that day. That detail was the final crushing piece. Walter's crime wasn't a faceless, victimless event from a crime blotter. It had a name, Philip Grady. It had a face, a family, a lifetime of silent suffering attached to it. My comfortable life, my children's education, my pretty garden, they had been subsidized in part by the devastation of another man's entire world. This knowledge burned away the last of my paralysis, replacing it with a cold, clear sense of moral necessity. This was bigger than my broken heart. I called Arthur Finn. I didn't ask. I told him. I requested a joint meeting with Walter with him present as soon as possible. In that sterile, humming visitation room, I laid out my terms. My voice didn't shake. My hands were steady in my lap. I will not file for immediate divorce, I stated, watching Walter's eyes flicker with a pathetic, desperate hope. He thought this was a lifeline. Doing so now, my lawyer informs me, could complicate your case and give you less incentive to cooperate fully. But here is what you will do, Walter. You will tell Agent Royce and the FBI everything, every single detail, where the rest of the money is hidden, the full names and last known whereabouts of your two partners, the planning, the execution, the aftermath. You will hold nothing back. And more importantly, you will sit down with Evelyn and David, not on the phone, in a room. You will look them in the eye and tell them the entire, unvarnished, ugly truth. No excuses, no justifications. You will apologize to them not for getting caught, but for stealing their real father from them, for making them part of a fiction. You will do this, and you will do it sincerely. Or I will stand up in that courtroom when the time comes, and I will tell the judge, the jury, and the world exactly how your 40-year deception has gutted your family. I will file for divorce so fast, it will make your head spin, citing fraud and irreconcilable differences, and you will face this entire nightmare utterly, completely alone. You will have no wife, no home to come back to, and children who will only know you as the man who lied to their mother for a lifetime. Do we understand each other? Walter stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. I saw fear there, but also a flicker of something else. Maybe shock, maybe a dawning recognition. He was seeing me for the first time not as his wife Connie, the agreeable gardener, but as a separate, formidable person with a will of iron and a moral compass he had never accounted for. He looked at Finn, who had remained silent throughout my speech. Finn gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a lawyer acknowledging a deal well negotiated even by a client's wife. Walter's shoulders slumped in total defeat. All the fight, all the pretense left him. Okay, he whispered the word, barely audible through the grate. Okay, Connie, I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. The meeting with the children was arranged in a small private conference room at the detention center, A bleak space with a scarred wooden table and no windows. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. It was the most emotionally grueling hour of my entire life. Walter, in his bright orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, sat across from Evelyn and David. I sat slightly apart at the end of the table, a witness, not a participant, not a mediator. Arthur Finn was a silent, observant statue in the corner. Walter began to talk. He started at the beginning, his job at Armored Solutions, the low pay, the resentment, the casual conversations in a bar that turned into a plan. He named names: Frankie the Ghost, Zelinka, and Michael O'Banion. He described the meticulous planning, the stolen route schedules, the fake breakdown they engineered. Then he described the day itself, October 12, 1978. The warm fall weather, the tightness in his chest, the moment his partner Frankie panicked and the gun, which was only supposed to be for show, went off. The sound, the blood, the frantic grab of money bags, the split in a dank warehouse, the days of paralyzing fear before he decided to run and reinvent himself. He told them about buying the fake credentials, choosing the name Driscoll, fabricating a resume, and the cross-country drive to start over. He told them about meeting me and the constant gnawing fear that lived in his gut every single day. The best and worst day of my life was the day Evelyn was born, he said, his voice cracking. Best because you were perfect. Worst because I knew then I could never tell the truth. I was trapped in the lie forever. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't make himself a Robin Hood or a victim of circumstance. He presented himself as he was a weak, greedy, cowardly man who made a catastrophic, violent choice and then spent every subsequent day building a prison of lies to hide from it. I am so sorry, he said, tears finally spilling over and tracing paths through his stubble. They were not theatrical tears. They were the slow leak of a soul emptied of secrets. I am sorry I was never the honest man you thought I was. I am sorry I made you both accomplices in a life you didn't choose. I am sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. I love you both, and my greatest shame is that I made my love for you part of the deception, part of the cover story. Evelyn cried silent, shaking tears, her hand pressed to her mouth. David sat rigid, his fists clenched so tightly on the table that his knuckles were white, his jaw working as he ground his teeth. When Walter finished, the room was thick with a silence that felt like wool in my ears. David stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the linoleum floor. He didn't look at anyone. I need air, he muttered, his voice thick, and he bolted from the room. In the heavy, suffocating silence that followed, I made myself speak. My voice sounded calm, far calmer than I felt. Your father's actions are his own. They belong to him. They are not a reflection of who you are or your worth. And my not knowing, that is my own burden to carry, and I will carry it. But we are here now. The truth is here, ugly and broken as it is. We have a choice. We can let this truth destroy us a second time, let it poison our relationships with each other. Or we can face it together, acknowledge the wreckage, and decide slowly what we build from here. Our family as we knew it is broken, but we are still a family. We just have to learn from scratch what that word means now. Later, true to his word, Walter cooperated fully with the FBI. He gave them the location of a long-term climate-controlled storage unit in a complex in Indianapolis rented under the name William Doyle. Inside, behind a false wall of boxes containing old magazines, was a moldering canvas duffel bag. It still contained over $420,000 in variously denominated decaying bills. His detailed testimony alongside old payroll records the FBI unearthed also led to the quiet arrest of Michael O'Banion, living under an assumed name and running a modest bait shop in Tampa, Florida. Frankie, the ghost Zelinka, they learned, had died in a car accident in Nevada in 1992. At the trial, I was subpoenaed to testify. I wore a simple navy blue dress. I described the Walter I knew, the quiet, reliable man who did the crossword in pen, who hated loud noises and political arguments, who remembered our anniversary with a card and a single rose. But when the prosecutor asked, Did you ever know the defendant to be Walter Joseph Miller, an armored truck driver involved in a violent robbery? I answered clearly, no, I did not. The man I described was a fabrication. The revelation that my life was a fabrication has caused profound and lasting emotional, psychological, and financial trauma to myself and to our family. I was not a character witness for the defense. I was a witness for the prosecution of the life he had stolen. I was a living exhibit of the collateral damage. The jury of 8 women and 4 men listened to me, a gray-haired woman in a simple dress, speaking softly but clearly, and I saw in their faces not scorn or disbelief, but a deep, sober understanding and a shared sadness for the scope of the ruin. Walter was sentenced to 15 years in a medium-security federal prison. Given his age, his complete lack of a criminal record before or since the crime, and his substantial and invaluable cooperation in recovering funds and apprehending another suspect, his lawyer predicted he would likely be eligible for compassionate release or transfer to a halfway house within 5 to 7 years. Legally, the divorce not yet finalized, he was still my husband. In every way that mattered to the heart, to the soul, to daily life, the marriage had ended at 10:17 a.m. on that Wednesday morning with the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. I pushed forward with the divorce. The process was cold procedural and oddly anticlimactic. It was the final official untying of a knot that had already frayed to nothing. The assets were frozen by the court, then painstakingly disentangled by forensic accountants and lawyers. A portion of our money, the legitimate savings from my own part-time work as a library aide over 20 years, my small personal IRA, and a court-approved spousal support stipend based on what his legitimate earning potential would have been, was secured for me. The rest of our joint assets, along with every dollar of the recovered stolen money, was liquidated and went towards restitution to the bank's insurance company, and most meaningfully to me, into a substantial settlement trust for Philip Grady's lifelong care. I took a portion of my own secured settlement and donated it in a lump sum to a national charity for victims of violent crime. It wasn't about atonement. I had not sinned. It was about altering the flow, about trying to take something born of violence, fear, and greed, and redirect it, however minutely, towards healing, support, and kindness. It was the first voluntary, intentional act I had done in months that made me feel clean, that felt like it came from my values, not from the aftermath of his crimes. My relationships with Evelyn and David were fragile, like bones mending after a bad break. They were tender, needed careful handling, and would never be quite the same again. The initial anger toward me had mostly faded, replaced by a shared bewildered grief and a dawning understanding of my own victimhood. We started having Sunday dinners again, awkward at first, filled with long silences and conversations that carefully skirted the giant, ghostly absence at the head of the table. We talked about Evelyn's daughter's soccer games, David's latest engineering project, the new Thai restaurant that opened downtown. Slowly, tentatively, we were learning a new language for our family, one where dad or your father was a subject approached with caution, not the central defining noun he once was. Martha, my steadfast friend, refused to let me become a recluse. She literally dragged me out of the house one Saturday to a farmer's market. The next week, she signed us both up for a community gardening club that met at the local botanical garden. There, surrounded by the smell of damp soil and green growing things among people who only knew me as Connie, the new lady with the amazing heirloom rose knowledge, I began to breathe again. The simple act of discussing aphid prevention or the proper pH for hydrangeas was medicinal. I made a tentative friend with a woman named Gail, a retired history teacher with a wry sense of humor. We talked about biographies and the best way to grow tomatoes in containers. We did not talk about husbands past or present. On a whim, I bought a journal with a plain blue linen cover. At night after the news, I would sit at the kitchen table and write. Not about Walter, not about the trial, not about the pain. I wrote about myself. What did I enjoy for breakfast now that I only cooked for one Greek yogurt with honey and walnuts? What kind of movies did I actually like when I didn't have to consider someone else's preference, historical dramas, and silly comedies? Did I want to travel? Where would I go if fear of flying wasn't a factor? Scotland. The Green Hills called to me. For 55 years, my answers to life's questions had always been woven with we. My opinions, my habits, my very identity were part of a duet. Now, the other singer was gone, and the silence was deafening. But in that silence, I had to discover the solo voice. It was terrifying and lonely, and some days the quiet was overwhelming. But in other moments, when I made a decision purely for myself, buying a bright yellow teapot, planting those sunflowers, staying up late to finish a novel, it felt like a tiny defiant spark of freedom igniting in the dark. It has been a year and 3 months now. I still live in the house on Maple Crest Lane, but it is no longer the same place. Walter's chair is gone, donated to a charity thrift store. I turned his dim wood-paneled study into a bright reading nook for my grandchildren, with a comfortable plush chair by the window and a shelf for their picture books. The rose garden still blooms with relentless beauty, a testament to steady, patient care, but I've added a wild, unruly patch of lavender for the bees and a row of bold, cheerful sunflowers that turn their faces to follow the sunflowers I chose simply because I liked their audacity, their unapologetic joy. People sometimes ask me, usually with careful hesitation, if I'm still angry. I was. A pure white-hot fire of rage kept me warm and fueled through the worst of the winter, through the trial, through the lonely nights. It was a useful fire. It kept me moving. But you can't live permanently in a fire. It consumes all the oxygen, it burns everything to ash. The anger has banked down now to a bed of quiet embers, a permanent low-grade sadness for the life I thought I had, for the man I thought I loved, for the years spent in a beautiful shared dream. I don't think that sadness will ever fully leave, and maybe it shouldn't. It's the scar tissue. It's the proof I lived through it. What I've learned in the marrow of my bones is this: we so often define ourselves through the prism of the people we love. We are someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's best friend. Our identity is relational. But when that mirror is shattered not by chance, but by a deliberate hidden fault line, you are left staring at the sharp, glittering pieces on the floor, asking the most fundamental question. Well, who am I then, all by myself? And I have learned slowly and painfully that I am not Connie, wife of Walter the liar. That woman was a character in his play. I am Connie, who survived that emotional tornado. I am Connie, who stood at a crossroads and chose the rocky path of truth, even when the path of willful ignorance was so tempting. I am Connie, who learned to stand on her own 2 feet, to balance her own checkbook, to make her own decisions, even if that learning started at 76 years old. Betrayal on such a scale can take your past. It can rewrite your history, but it does not get to dictate your future. You always have a choice in how you write the next chapter and all the chapters after that. Just last week, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail amidst the bills and catalogs. The return address was a string of numbers, an FCI Elkton. It was from Walter. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I opened it with a sort of detached curiosity. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't speak of love or regret in a grand way. He wrote about the monotony of his routine, the vegetable garden. The inmates were allowed to tend the biography of Ulysses S. Grant he was reading. It was the mundane chatter of a very confined life. And then, at the very end, almost as an afterthought, he wrote, "How are the roses this year? Is the new dawn climber still thriving by the front walk? I always liked that one." I read those lines several times. I put the letter down on the sun-warmed wood of the kitchen table. The morning light streamed through the window over the sink, falling across the page in a bright rectangle, illuminating his neat, familiar handwriting. I looked out the window at my garden, the deep pink of the new dawn roses against the fence, the bold yellow heads of the sunflowers, the buzzing activity of the lavender patch, all alive and vibrant under the vast clear blue sky. I inhaled deeply. The house was quiet, but it was my quiet. I don't know if I will write back. There is no urgency. There may never be an answer. And for now, in this moment, that is perfectly okay. The sun is warm on my skin. The air through the screen door smells of cut grass and earth. My life so profoundly different, so imperfect, so unexpectedly, my own is waiting for me in the next quiet hour and the one after that. Thank you for listening to my story. It means more than I can say to share this with you. If there's one thing I hope you take from my experience, it's this: wherever you are in your own journey, whether you're in a season of calm or a storm of your own, remember that the power to write the next chapter always lies with you. Your past does not have to be your prison. What would you have done if you were in my shoes, facing that knock at the door? How do you find your own strength when the story you've been living suddenly changes? I'd really like to know your thoughts. Please share them in the comments below. If this story of resilience resonated with you, if it touched something in your heart, please give it a like. It lets me know these shared experiences matter. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories about life, love, loss, and the quiet courage it takes to rebuild. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message today, someone facing their own unexpected turn, please share this story with them. A little kindness, a little understanding can be a lifeline. Thank you for your kindness, for listening, and for being part of this community. May you find peace, strength, and your own authentic truth every single day.